On this episode of Behind the Mic with Nick Morgasen, we sit down with Tommy James of Tommy James and the Shondells, and we practically discuss everything from the beginning of his career when Hanky Panky was kind of a forgotten record, and eventually it sold 80,000 copies and became number one on the charts, which kind of made Tommy James and the Shondells a big group at that point in time. And then we kind of discuss what happens to the group over time, how he became solo, how he began to produce other musicians, and basically you get another idea or sense of what 1960s music is about. Now let's go behind the mic with Tommy James. From 1959 to 1964, you were part of a group called the Tornadoes that you helped form. The Tornadoes had a sizable regional following. Can you talk a little bit about that band and how it was formed?
Sure. Well, this was actually back in my hometown of Niles, Michigan, back in the early 60s. And, I was in high school, and I was playing locally, and we sort of developed a following. We played any place that would have us, teen dances, halls, dance halls, VFWs, Elks clubs, any place. And so it was during that time that we basically had a couple of little regional label deals before I was out of high school. And from the second one, a little company called Snap Records that was put together by a local DJ in Niles, we basically recorded several songs from him, one of them being a song called Hanky Panky. And we released it locally in 1964. I was a junior in high school, and the record kind of came and went, but we developed a bit of a larger following. We changed our name to the Shondells, and the record sort of came and went, and we forgot about it. So a year later, I graduated from high school, and I took my band on the road, and we were playing all up through the Midwest. And right in the middle of my 2 weeks in a club we were playing in early 1966, the IRS shuts down the club owner, and we lose our gig and go back to Niles feeling like real losers. Well, as soon as I got home, that's how the good Lord works, because as soon as I got home, I got the call that changed my life. This record that we had forgotten about from 2 years earlier suddenly out of nowhere explodes out of Pittsburgh and is the number one record in the city of Pittsburgh. And it was bootlegged, and they sold 80,000 copies of them in 10 days, and we were sitting at number one. So, I couldn't put the original band back together, so I went there by myself with the original record producer, and sure enough, we got there, and it was we were number one, and we broke out of Pittsburgh with Hanky Panky and took the record to Roulette Records in New York City a week later and sold it, and it became the number one record in the country the summer of '66, and so that began my career, and that quite literally is the story of how we got from little town of Niles, Michigan to New York City.
So success continued for you and the group with one of the longest strings of nonstop hits in recording industry history, Say I Am What I Am, and It's Only Love, and the Hanky Panky album, which went gold just 4 weeks after its release. You brought it into producers Bo Gentry and Richie Cordell, and over the next 2 years they produced 3 platinum albums, which included 7 more back-to-back smash singles. I Think We're Alone Now, Mirage, I Like the Way, Getting Together, Out of the Blue, Get Out Now, and Money Money. What was it like being one of the most popular bands of your era?
Well, listen, it was wonderful. It was it was like being in the center of a storm. I mean, it was just we were very fortunate at Roulette. We had one hit after another, and I have often said that if we had signed with one of the big corporate labels instead of a smaller independent label like Roulette, I'm sure we would have not had the success we had. At Roulette, they actually left us alone and allowed us to have total creative control over our career. And it really meant a lot. We went through so many different phases of music, starting out as, sort of a garage band, and then a studio band, and then after Moni Moni with party rock, and gradually went into more progressive album rock in 1969, starting with Crimson and Clover. And Crimson and Clover is where we began producing ourselves and writing for ourselves as well as playing. And we were very fortunate to have the attention of the public for all those years. I'm sure that wouldn't happen today. It probably wouldn't happen in the same way because you're much more pigeonholed today than you were back then. And we were allowed to basically morph into whatever we could become. And so I was very happy about that.
So in 1968, you became one of the first acts to experiment with music videos. You created a mini film around Money Money for theatrical showings. You were pioneers way ahead of your time. Whose idea was it to do the video?
Well, mine, I guess. It seemed very logical to me to do films of your hit records, and so I, to me, it was a very logical next step. And but we had a really a tough time getting videos played anywhere on American television back then, because you got to remember this was 13 years before MTV, so we had a really tough time, and television people did not want record people, music business people telling them what to do. They didn't appreciate it. They didn't like it. So the only place we could get our videos played was, believe it or not, in European movie theaters between, this is in the late 60s, between the double features. So, it was me and Daffy Duck for a long time.
In 1969, you took over the creative reins by writing and producing your next record, Crimson and Clover. The single and the accompanying album went multi-platinum and included two more big hits for the group, Do Something to Me and Crystal Blue Persuasion. What made you decide to produce your own albums?
Well, it was time. We had really gotten a great education the first, 3-4 years, and I just really felt that it was time for us to burn our bridges and begin taking total command of our records, and so that's what we did. I mean, Crimson and Clover, like no other record, allowed us to make the jump from, I guess you would say, AM top 40 singles to FM progressive album rock. And right at that moment in our history, we made this, the whole industry made this huge move from singles to albums. And so we realized that, it would be very likely to have, to just, not have any more career, to just stop selling records if we didn't do that, if we didn't start selling albums, and if we didn't produce ourselves and didn't do all of our own writing, it was quite likely that our career would be over. So Crimson and Clover really allowed us to move into this whole other universe, and of course it was great for us because that's when we really began selling albums.
So you followed the success of the Crimson and Clover album with Cellophane Symphony, which featured the newly developed Moog synthesizer and included yet another top 10 single, Sweet Cherry Wine. What effect did using the Moog synthesizer have on producing this album?
Well, it just was obviously the next phase of music. When I first saw the first synthesizer, it was hard to know exactly what it was. It looked like this gigantic 1920s switchboard with a keyboard attached to it. It was, of course, all analog. There was nothing digital at that moment. Everything was analog, and it was just this huge black machine that did strange things. You know, it was all mono. There was nothing polyphonic on it. You couldn't make a chord at the time. You could only play one instrument at a time, and it did very rudimentary things like play trumpets and wind and drums and things like that. But it was really quite limited in what it could do. But yet you knew that from an electronic standpoint that was the future. And within a year we went from that rudimentary synthesizers to mellotrons and more complicated synthesizers and gradually into the digital age. But at that moment, it was just, it was like a look into the future. And so we sort of built our album around the synthesizer. And it was really a very interesting album to do. We, as you say, called it Cellophane Symphony. And we recorded it at a little studio on Broadway called Broadway Sound at Broadway and 54th Street. And it was the only electronic instrument like that. It was the only synthesizer in New York City at that moment. And so we had a lot of fun with it.
So continuing in the year 1969, it happened to be one of your best record sales, even topping the Beatles for that year. The Best of Tommy James and the Shondells also appeared that year and ultimately sold over 10 million copies. What do you attribute to the success of Tommy James and the Shondells that allowed you to sell millions of records?
Well, several things, really. I mean, first of all, we were radio. We were favored at radio, and that really, I've often said we were a creation of radio. Some acts come along and they're a big concert act. They start with concerts first, or they start with songwriting first. But we really started with radio. Radio just we had a lot of friends at radio, and radio just took to us. So that was one thing. The other thing was, as I said before, we were allowed to change. We weren't pigeonholed. We were allowed to make strategic moves in our styles and in the way we approach things. And third, I would say it's maybe third and fourth is just the fans were always with us, and we always seemed to be able to garner the fans. They always followed us into whatever new venture we were doing, and last but certainly not least, the good Lord who has always kept it going for us.
So in 1970, you released the last album with the Shondells at the time, called Travelin', which contained the gold singles "She" and "Gotta Get Back to You." Mm-hmm. With all success of the band, why did you guys decide to go your separate ways?
Well, it was sort of an accident, actually. We really were just going to take 6 months off because we'd been going at it for over 5 years. On the road, in the studio, writing constantly. We were always on. And so we just decided to take a breather, and we really didn't know that it was going to be the breakup of the band. We didn't intend it that way. We've always been best friends. We remain best friends to this day. But it was just when we split up, they started with other interests. A couple of the guys started a very successful studio in Pittsburgh and started another group. And I went back in the studio. I started producing other people. I produced Alive and Kickin', Tighter, and I produced people like Patty Austin and Benny Mardones and a group named Exile. And so I was producing other people, and then I went back in the studio on my own and began having hits by myself. So just one thing led to another, and the group just never got back together again.
Talking about how you went on to a solo career, writing and producing the million-selling single you just talked about, Tighter,
Mm-hmm.
for the group Alive and Kickin'. Over the next 4 years, you had an additional 12 chart singles, including Come to Me, Ball and Chain, I'm Coming Home, and Dragging the Line. What's the difference between being part of a group and being off on your own?
Well, of course, I really missed those guys. I mean, I really did. I mean, and we got together and wrote after that. It wasn't like we never saw each other again. And it was just a very different kind of a feeling. And I can only say that I miss those guys a lot. They were like family. And by the way, I just wanted to tell you that we recently have gotten back together again. You know, we're doing a movie of our book. Our book, Me, the Mob, and the Music, has become a bestseller, and it's an autobiography about our years at Roulette Record and just everything that happened. And I got the Shondells and I got back together to make music for the movie. And I Think We're Alone Now. We did a brand new version of I Think We're Alone Now that's going to be in the movie as closing credits. And it was so great to get back in the studio with these guys because it was like riding a bike. You never forget. You know, it was so amazing. We'd get up to do the vocals. Everybody knew what vocal part to take. And, you know, it was just really, really incredible. And so I'm... you know, although the group of Shondells that I'm working with now is not the same group, obviously, but I do get together on a fairly consistent basis with the old group.
So your songs have become pop culture classics and were being covered by over 300 artists, among them Prince, R.E.M., Tom Jones, and Cher. Others have performed your songs in concert, including Bruce Springsteen, Kelly Clarkson, Santana, and The Killers. How does it feel to have your songs being performed by all of these big artists?
Well, I'm very flattered and very honored. I really am. I really am. It really feels good that you know a lot of artists think the fast way to a hit record is to, you know, record your old songs. I think it's great. Obviously, I like some versions better than others, but I really think you know it's really terrific when other artists. I'm very interested to hear how other artists interpret your music too. It was very interesting. Dolly Parton and I did Crimson and Clover together a few years ago. It was really interesting. Her version of Crimson and Clover was very different than the original record and really fascinating to listen to. Prince did a version of Crimson and Clover 2 years ago. He had a #1 record with his album, his first digital album, and the first single they released was Crimson and Clover. And he did a very futuristic version of Crimson and Clover that was different than anything I had ever heard. So it's fascinating. R.E.M. did a great job on Dragging the Line in the Austin Powers movie. So it's really incredible to hear other artists do your songs in their style and the way they see it going. So I'm always fascinated by that.
So as you just said, your music has also been in movies, television shows, and advertisements. Movies include Forrest Gump, Moneyball, The Italian Job, Cap Fear, We Are Marshall, Pirate Radio, and Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me. And then also you've had a ton of hits on many different television shows. What is it about your songs that make them attractive to movies and TV?
Well, you know, I just think there's good energy around the music. You know, I feel that way, for example, around the Beatles music or the Beach Boys music or the Four Seasons. You know, I just think we were very lucky to make it when we did, that there's just so much good feeling and good energy around the music that makes it fun to do. I think it's as simple as that.
So in 2008, you marked the start of your 5th decade as a recording artist with the release of the I Love Christmas album and the fan-pleasing career-spanning retrospective of 40 years, the complete singles collection, which included all 48 of your singles. What does it take to have staying power and remain popular after all these years?
Well, I just think it's sort of a magic relationship between you and the fans, and I think it's often indefinable like that. I don't think you can really put your finger on it. I have a very hard time articulating that. Except to say that the fans have just always been with us, and you know, when you've been doing it as long as I have, the fans sort of become like extended family. I look out into our concert crowd now; I literally see 3 generations of people, and I just think that's incredible. I certainly, when I started out with Hanky Panky, never envisioned doing it this long and being able to do it this long. Rock and roll is an industry that maybe gives you 2 or 3 years, and we've been doing it for almost 50. So I'm just amazed by it. I don't think anybody's more amazed by it than I am.
So in 2010, you published your autobiography, Me, the Mob, and the Music,
right,
which became a bestseller and enjoyed great reviews from critics and industry insiders, and was chosen by Rolling Stone magazine as one of your 25 greatest rock and roll memoirs of all time at number 12. Is there any insight that you can share with me that would help people understand more about Tommy James?
Well, I really I can't say for sure, except that the book I think is sort of, because it's an autobiography, you got to tell the truth. And I think a lot of things that people didn't know, they will know as a result of the book. The book is going to be a movie now, directed by or produced by Barbara DeFina, who did Goodfellas and Casino and Hugo a couple of years ago, and just so many, a trail of great movies. And we're so honored that she's producing our film. But basically, the book itself, Me, the Mob, and the Music, the reason for the provocative title is that Roulette Records, the label that we had about 70%, 80% of our success on, in addition to being a functioning record company, was also a front for the Genovese crime family in New York. And of course, none of us knew that at the time. We had to learn it incrementally. And so the book is essentially about this, about having a career in rock and roll with this very dark and sinister story going on behind us that we couldn't talk about. I didn't even feel right writing the book until the last of these people had passed on. It was at the record company. And so that's when we did it. And it's going to be, I think, a very insightful film, as I believe the book is, because of all the things we weren't able to talk about. So, I would just, all I can say is that the relationship between the fans, goes on.
Tommy, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure. Nice talking with you, Nick.